Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched 2017's The Death of Stalin. For anyone who may not be familiar with this film, or if it isn't already apparent from the cover, this is a slightly lighter take on the core concept than the title itself might suggest. This is essentially a farce, a satirical black comedy film, and it is written and directed by Armando Iannucci, who is a bit more of a name in. Despite his name, he is British, and is a bit more well known over there. However, he's got quite a number of credits to his name, including, I think, being a writer and producer on Veep, which is the thing people in the US would probably be most likely to have known him by. He has a couple of frequent collaborators in the writing department, but yeah, this is very much up his alley in terms of his work. He largely does sort of political satire and historical stuff, and is extremely talented in that area, I would say. I'm a big fan of a lot of his work, although I have not consumed all of it, or even a substantial proportion of it. But when I saw this was coming out, and it did get a relatively limited release, I believe, I was eager to watch it, which is why it took me 4 years to watch it, because, by all accounts, that's quick for me. So anyway, The Death of Stalin. This is basically what it says on the tin. There's not much for me to spoil. So, I mean, the content of the film itself would be difficult to spoil, so I'm not gonna hold back too much. Only where it seems appropriate, not to just spoil beats and things. Generally speaking, really great film. Big fan of it on basically all accounts. Iannucci is and his writing collaborators have a definite knack for a certain sort of pithy repartee in their dialogue, in their writing in general. The ways that they articulate sort of not only direct but indirect concepts are both smart and sharp, but also can be subtle, and have a lot of layering to them. And in the context of the story of the film, which is literally the death of Stalin and the ensuing time, there's a lot to unpack about, a lot of things, not the least of which is both the state of the Soviet Union at the time and the nature of humanity in light of such a power vacuum. I don't need to get into all the historical details, although I will touch on it a little bit, and you guys should know by now I tend to do that. So Stalin's death, the Stalinist USSR is unequivocally one of the worst, if not the worst, totalitarian regime ever to face the earth. It's kind of uncanny how papered over the history of Stalinism has been, especially in light of documents that were released or discovered after the fall of the USSR, but the crimes committed by the regime are so uncountable, I can't possibly cover them. Nonetheless, the relevant portion here is that the power vacuum that was left with the death of Stalin was unbelievable. Like, when you've got so many nations and so much land and so many people essentially at the beck and call of a single figure. To have that power vacuum open up leads to, surprise, surprise, some strife. So the film really follows a number of different, essentially cabinet members, people who were subordinates to Stalin, relatively directly, and their reactions and their machinations. That might be too complimentary a word, machinations, following his death. What's really fascinating about this film is just how much humor can be extracted from what is truly one of the worst places and times in history, and the levity with which such horrible events and horrible atrocities can be delivered is shocking. It is very impressive and very well done, and probably does not get enough credit for the light touch and the balance that is given to the writing to make sure that it doesn't delve too far into the darkness, nor does it make too much light of real suffering. There are definitely moments that swing back and forth, but I think that really adds more than anything to ensure that you never forget the context, but you also have genuine amounts of laughter. And this is a film. This is one of the films in recent memory that has made me laugh the most. Not necessarily always the strongest laughs or the most uproarious laughter, but some of the most consistent, laughter of some kind or another, often sort of just lightly chuckling at the whole absurdity of the thing. And that's really what so much of this is about, and about Iannucci's work in general is so much about the absurdity of politics and history, and how people behave, and the realities of history that are not told in the history books, that being, the sort of human element, the screw ups and failings and just bizarre behaviors, and how strange and funny people can be. That said, there's a lot more I could say about that, but I'll step back from it a little bit and say that one of the things that really makes this work so much is the cast. This is a fairly large cast for a fairly low budget movie, and a number of very substantial names on the ticket. Largely people you probably have heard of before if you're a bit of a cinemaphile, but maybe not the most recognizable names to the general Hollywood going public. Possibly the only one that the only one or only ones that people might recognize right off the bat are Steve Buscemi and Michael Palin. But there are quite a number of other people on this list who are well-known actors, and they across the board are great regardless of their place in popular culture. So everybody does a great job, and what really sort of adds to sort of not the levity and the absurdity and the relatability of the whole thing is the fact that they don't go for accents. That's the whole it's a bunch of I think it's almost exclusively American and British actors, and they're not doing accents. They're just doing their voices, basically, with some minor variation. Obviously, they're still acting, but they're not putting on Russian accents or anything. And it really adds to, it's not, at least to me, doesn't break immersion at all. It's very clear that the film is not going for a strict interpretation. It's not being particularly historically accurate. It's being a little historically accurate, more so than you might think. But that, like, all of these diplomats from mostly from Russia, a few from other places in the USSR, are played by Americans and Brits doing American and British accents. And that both sort of sets a particular tone in terms of the seriousness with which to address it, but also just sort of, I guess it feeds into the absurdity and the lightness. I had another phrase I was going to use, but now it's left me. The whole thing, every scene is great. They don't need, like, nothing is unnecessary. It's not particularly highbrow or lowbrow. It's very sort of real feeling, for want of a better phrase. The sort of little things and the petty squabbles are all really the focus, and it's all delivered super, super well. Iannucci actually doesn't have a huge number of director credits. I think he's got a lot more writing credits than anything. But to the point of the cinematography and the direction, that is done super impressively. It's not really. It's not like, it doesn't have a really strong artistic vision in terms of the direction, but it's all delivered, or it's all filmed in very appropriate ways. Whether that's wide shots, close shots, hand cam, big long shots on dollies or on tripods. It's all executed very, very well. The one thing I will say for the cinematography that I'm going back and forth on is that the color grading is the color grading and some of the lighting is a little bit questionable. The color grading is very sort of, it's not excessively muted, but it's more muted than I feel like is appropriate, maybe. And while obviously that increases the sort of feeling of the drabness of the Soviet Union in the 50s and the suffering of the people under this abject poverty, that even, these oligarchs are sort of still somewhat living in squalor. That said, because of this, like, levity and absurdity to the whole thing, I'm not sure whether that's entirely necessary, and it may detract a little bit from the that sort of intention to bring a humor to the whole thing. What's kind of interesting about the release of this film is apparently Russia and some of the former Soviet socialist republics got pretty pissed about this film and banned it, which is bizarre to me because it seems to have entirely missed the point, which is this really isn't a critique of Russian history or Stalinism. Not that those things absolutely deserve critique, and they're horrific and all these other things, but, like, that's not really the focus here. What's possibly most fascinating about this movie is it's less about the Soviet Union and Russia and more about, I forgot to turn off my AC. Sorry guys, I don't know if you can hear that. It's less about the Soviet Union and Russia and Stalin and the oligarchs of the time, although it's very clearly directly about those things. But there's an indirect, really more of an indirect but pointed attack at current politics in so-called democracies. So it's really it's not really pointed out explicitly at any point. But to me, one of the most fascinating things is the political parallels between that era and the oligarchic squabblings that happened in the power vacuum, and compared to modern politics, especially in the U.S. and Britain, and the rise of sort of modern authoritarian movements and pseudo-democratic, not quite literally kangaroo courts, but more modern equivalents, and so for the Russians in particular to take this as an insult is fascinating to me, and really says a lot more about them and their attachment to. Well, I shouldn't say, when I say Russians, I don't mean the Russian people. I mean the Russian government, because, yeah, trying to differentiate between the people are never the government in any case, no matter where you are. It's just not it. So, for the Russian government to have this continued adherence to the legacy of Stalinism and these World War II events that they're so, while they're very important historically, are still treated with a weirdly religious reverence, is a fascinating defense, given that so much of it is more about modern contexts and not even in the USSR or Russia. So, yeah, I mean, this is a really fascinating film, incredibly entertaining on so many counts, on so many different levels. Really well written, really well directed, really well acted. A great sort of social critique, while still managing not to hit you over the head with it at any point. Iannucci is, I think, despite being well known, is relatively underrated. Especially with an entry like this, I definitely put him up near, if not next to, people like the Coen brothers, in terms of their ability to blend genre and have this sort of unique mix of drama and humor, and all these sort of nuances and subtle niceties to their works. So I really appreciated this film. I am eager to see whatever Iannucci works on next, and obviously all the various other people who were involved in this. And if any of what I've described is at all interesting and not just boring right off the bat, I highly, highly recommend you watch it. It's reasonably short as well. I think it's an hour and 40 minutes. No, not even. Hour and 37. No, hour and 107 minutes. Fuck. I can do math. Shut up. Anyway, thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched. I've been the Social Solipsist, and I will see you guys next time.